Can you see? Yeah, it's working.
The, the hardware store that I'm speaking of was on Lot 8 of Block 24 in the village of Roscommon. This lot uh, ran lengthwise 132 feet along Lake Street and only 50 feet along Fifth Street. It was located across the street from McCready's store. In speaking of the original Rutledge Brothers Hardware, as far as I know of it, it was a it was featured in the Houghton Lake Resorter on August 8, 1985, when they're talking about the centennial of the village of Roscommon. And the picture was there, shows Bruce Rutledge in there. My father had very little to do with operating the hardware store after he went back to Lansing about 1917 and then went back in 1918. And Bruce and his sons operated that store along with Tommy Clark as the clerk. Stuart Rutledge was a large man, tall, uh, out of weight, heavy set. He was an excellent baseball player. They used to tell that he could drive the ball farther for a home run up at the old fields than anybody else. He played basketball for the high school and was a center and was a very excellent center. And he played for many years after that. He graduated from the high school here in Roscommon about 1927. I never saw him play baseball because play basketball because he had stopped playing before I came to town. But I heard about him lots of ways. And he was quite an athlete at that time. Blaine never participated that I know of in basketball or softball or baseball, although he did say in his statements that he played basketball and that he was playing basketball when the basketball court here in Roscommon over Price's store burned down. At that time, some of the men in Roscommon went elsewhere to play basketball. Woody Lockery went to Houghton Lake. Don Emery and Chuck Cornelia went to Grayling to school. And I don't know when was the first time there was a basketball court in Roscommon after Price's building burned down. The Rutledge brothers operated the store. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Bruce was running the store, was half owned by my father, who was in Lansing. And this continued this way until my father died here in Roscommon, July 15th, 1934. The unusual thing with this is that Bruce Rutledge died 3 months later, and they were both gone. And Stuart was about 22, and Blaine about 19, and it was worked out between my mother and Stuart and Blaine and their mother that they would operate in the Rutledge Brothers hardware store and we would have no part of it. Something happened at that time which I will not talk about, but this is one of the factors that determined I should become an attorney later in life.
Oh, sure.
I can remember when Stuart had graduated from high school and he went to college at Olivet College for 1 or 2 years because he used to stop at our home in Lansing, and when he was coming back and forth from Olivet College. He did not graduate from there. But the two of them operated the store from 1934 until they sold out at a later date, maybe 30 years later. When they sold out to a couple who took over the store, they went into the wholesale ski business, and they sold skis and ski clothing and everything else for quite a number of years, and they traveled all over Michigan and elsewhere selling their product. Speaking of the original Rutledge Brothers hardware store, this store became owned by Charlie DeWale, and eventually it was torn down. He then built a series of stores on this particular lot, which included a gas station on the corner and Rutledge Brothers Hardware, a grocery store, A&P, and then the place where
Where Gardner's is? Julie? No.
the McWilliams Barber Shop,
Oh.
and then Mrs. Williams had a beauty shop there with
Minnie Green?
Dave Doherty's grandmother,
Minnie Green.
with Blanche No.
Wasn't that Minnie Green?
Minnie Green. This store continued to be there until about 1942. I can't give you the exact date. But I remember I was home from college, and I was in the house, and I never heard the fire truck, but the store completely burned down and was gone. Later, the store was gone, and Stewart and Blaine moved to somewhere else. I think they bought another store here in town. And eventually, they built a new store, about 1946 or so, where it was presently located on 5th Street. Other than what other work they might have done, I don't know of any, except operate the hardware store and then finally became wholesalers in ski goods. Eventually, Stewart and Blaine sold their cottage on Higgins Lake, which was this side of
No.
side of Flag Point, and it was a very nice place. They eventually sold that, and Stewart and Lil moved to Florida, and eventually, after a number of years, Blaine moved to Florida. So that is about all I can tell you of them, other than what Blaine said in his statements in his interview. Therefore, the Rutledge name died out through that connection, and it was up to me to do something. My father and mother were married in 1918, as I said, and they moved to Lansing. And at that time, my father was appointed the state fire marshal. Now, technically, the state fire marshal was the director of the Office of Insurance, but my father ran the office and did everything about it. Just the statute says that the Department of Insurance was actually the fire marshal. This continued, for I would say about 6 years. And they lived in East Lansing. And my father and grandfather owned the building on Michigan Avenue, directly across from the Union Building of Michigan State College.
Really?
And at that time, the ground floor of this building used to be a restaurant. Now, later on, I can't tell you exactly when, they bought a house on Hillsdale Street, which was right next to West Junior High School. And I can remember when I was a little kid driving my tricycle on the sidewalks there, and it was next to Weaver's grocery store. About I was born June 28th, 1921 in the city of Lansing. And my sister, I have one younger sister, she was born December 9, 1924 in Lansing. And about 1923 or 4, my father changed jobs. But prior to this, the Michigan State Police was organized about 1919. In 1921, they passed a law in Michigan which put many units of government under the Michigan State Police, and one was the Fire Marshal's Department. My father was still the Fire Marshal, but then technically the commander of the Michigan State Police was the official fire warden. But it was always the case that my father ran. So I can tell you that I can remember from years being out there to see the Michigan State Police and all the people, and I can remember that one of the captains of the state police used to take me to all football games at Michigan State University. My father wouldn't do that. He would drive out to the state police headquarters, give me to this captain, and then the captain would say, "Come on, you and my son are going in. Just go through and find a seat." And we didn't have any tickets. He said, "They won't kick you out. I'll make sure of that." So we saw many games when I was young. But my father wouldn't go to football games or baseball games. He never saw me play or participate in any type of sport, but he always liked to go and watch the wrestling and the boxing. And I can remember when I was a little kid that I was taken down, I'd watch the real wrestlers at the time, like Strangler Lewis and all the rest, and they weren't playing hokey, they were playing for real. And also the boxing matches that happened to come to Lansing. About 1924, my mother and father started buying a home in Lansing at 610 South Jennison, which was in a subdivision on the west side of Lansing, just east of the Beltline Railroad. We were on the absolute edge of the city, which in later years included the Fisher Body Plant and the Michigan Avenue Woods, where I and many other children played so much, eventually became Sexton High School in Lansing. About 1924, an opportunity was given to my father to work for Consumers Power. So he resigned from his state of Michigan job at Fire Marshal and became, actually the lobbyist for Consumers Power in the state of Michigan. He remained in that job until he died in 1934. In 1933, he had a severe heart attack, And I can remember him being in bed in the house for weeks on end, because that's the way they treated severe heart attack that time. And we went to Florida in the winter of 33, 34, and stayed down there all year, and came back in the spring, and my father seemed to be getting better, but we came to Roscommon after visiting some friends, and something happened, and he only lived about a week. In 1934, it appears, from what I could gather, that the hardware store, was in debt. And finally, my mother signed off her interest in the store, so she wasn't liable for the debts. And Bruce and his family had the store. Bruce only lived 3 months after my father, and he died. And then Stewart and Blaine took it over. And grandfather Crozier died 4 months after that, and he was living here in Roscommon. And my grandmother, Rutledge, died in 1936. So they didn't live very long, and I saw very little of them at the time. So we come to a point where I'll try to follow down of my life and what happened and whether I'm still a Rutledge or not. I went to school in Lansing, to Michigan Avenue School in the kindergarten and first 3 grades. And then they opened Main Street School, which was only about 3 blocks from our home. And it was a real pleasure to go to Main Street. And I was, in my 6th grade, I was the head of the safety patrol and a few other things. But the only thing that anybody else would recognize, in many later years, Magic Johnson went to Main Street School as a basketball player. Then I went to West Junior High School, which was 6 or 8 blocks away, and went through there for 3 years. My mother was employed by the state of Michigan, the Secretary of State's office, as working in the driver's license department in about 1934, shortly after my father died, because many of my father's friends were still very active, and they got her a job, and she worked there until 1936. In 1936, Soapy Williams became the governor of Michigan, and Soapy was a Democrat, and what was normal in those days, everybody in the state offices that were Republican were replaced by Democrats, including my mother. She tried to find work in some of the stores in Lansing, but she wasn't really trained for any of that, and she couldn't find a job, and we're in the middle of the Depression. It's a pretty hard time. My mother only went to school through the 3rd grade because she was at Houghton Lake, and she said they used to have to walk to school through deep snowbanks and all the rest, and eventually she got tired of doing that, decided no. But one thing she always said, her children would go to college. There never was any doubt in my mind or my sister Jean's mind that we were going to college, no matter what it took, that's where we were going to go. So we never thought about doing anything different than that. And my mother was fairly strong-willed, but wonderful woman. My father joined golf course, Walnut Hills Golf Course, in 1931. And one of the funny things about it, when he died, he left 3 sets of golf clubs, and he was left-handed, and I've always been right-handed, so it didn't do me any good. But anyway, she decided she was going to learn to play golf and to do it right. And when he was belonged to Walnut Hill, she eventually worked herself up to the championship flight in that part. When my father died in 1934, he was 59 years old, died of a heart attack, and I was just barely 13. I can remember when we were in Florida, that winter before he died, that he would say, "Bernice, why are you teaching this child to drive? He isn't old enough." And I can remember her say, "Yes, but if something happens to you, he's going to be driving the cars once he becomes old enough, and I'm not going to do any driving." And one of the things, one of the men from the Packard Motor Car Company, dealer, also taught me to drive. And the day I was 14 years of age, Glenn Sharon of the Packard dealer in Lansing came and took me down to the chief of police and said he trained me to drive and I was a good driver and all that. So I came out of the office with my driver's license. One of the things I might add, maybe in a sense of bragging, my father was very well known in Roscommon and other places. A very good friend of George Mason of the Mason tract up here. And he was well thought of. I can remember that it was not unusual in a home to come home and we were going to have pheasant dinner or something else, and we had company in the house, and it might be a Supreme Court justice, Secretary of State, or somebody else. I don't ever remember a governor being there, but I knew some of them. And at that time, Frank Fitzgerald was the Secretary of State, and they used to have a little club they called the Aristocrats of the Road for the first 100 license plates, 1 through 100.
Oh, sure.
And my father, not being associated with the state of Michigan anymore, he still drove a car with number 7 on it all the time. And we had that for years.
Great.
My father owned a 1932 or 33 Packard, and that's one of those big cars that had the spare wheels in the front fenders, and the trunk was just folded down. It was just a rack and all that. That's what I learned to drive cars on.
It's pretty classy, John. That was pretty classy.
I remember one time when I was going to Central High School in Lansing in the 10th grade. I drove my mother to work at the state office building, and then I went on to school. And a policeman stopped me, and I said, "I don't think I've done anything wrong." He said, "Where's your license?" which I produced. And he looked me over and he said, I had to stop you. He said, "You're looking through the steering wheel, not over it, and I didn't think you were old enough to drive." that type of stuff happened. Incidentally, we traded that car off in 1937, and I've never seen one that was like it. I don't know. I've looked at a lot of museums, and I've never seen one of those. Like, it was a huge, big car to drive in that part, but we had lots of fun. Anyway, in 1937, in September, my mother couldn't find a job in Lansing, and she said, "Let's move to Roscommon, back where I came from, and I own a house on Vinegar Hill, and let's go up there, and you go to school in Roscommon, and Jean goes to school too." And I agreed with it, and Jean didn't, but that didn't matter, I guess. And we came to Roscommon sometime in September 1937, and I was a junior in high school. I played
But
back.
Jean came with you.
Yeah,
Your
Jean
sister.
came with us, and she was put in the. See, I was a junior, and she was put in, I believe, in the 8th or 9th grade at that time. I played basketball for 2 years that I was in high school, and at the same time, we had a new coach come into town from Michigan State, and he knew I was from Lansing, and he and I tried to teach the kids in Roscommon how to play football. There was only about two of them that knew how. There was no football team. And we had uh, tag football teams all fall, each of 2 years trying to do it. And I always loved to play football, but the point was that I was a small kid, and uh, they got their first football team here in Roscommon the year after I graduated. Anyway, I played basketball and played a guard position with Harry Meyer, and there were three seniors, and Harry Meyer was a junior, and I was a junior, and Eldon Blue was a junior. And we were fairly successful. We had an easy schedule. I shouldn't say that in front of anybody from Houghton Lake or Grayling, but Grayling was a Class C, and we were a Class D, and we won, I believe, 21 games that year, and we went to the state tournament, and we were beaten in the semifinals of the state tournament. That was our first defeat. The coach determined he was going to have a tough schedule the next year, and so we took on Gaylord and various other places that were ranked a lot higher. And that year, we lost 2 games during the season, and we only played about 15 games that day. But all the games we played were tough ones. We went on to the state tournament, and we were eliminated in Flint IMA Auditorium in the quarterfinals. One of the features of that being a problem was that when we played Houghton Lake in the districts over at Lake City that year, I happened to intercept the ball and start down the floor, and I jumped up in the air and threw it down to Joe Meyer. And when I did, the fellow from Houghton Lake bent over underneath me, and I lit on his back and flipped and hit myself on the elbow, and I couldn't straighten my elbow off. So I played a little bit of the game, and I called timeout, and I said, "Coach, you can't straighten my arm." And I couldn't. And I tried to, we had a doctor at the game there, and he said, "Nothing I can do for you. It'll eventually straighten out, but it's just going to take time." So we played the next few games that were played in the regionals, and my arm wouldn't straighten out, so I couldn't shoot, but I could still dribble and do things. And we lost in the quarterfinal game to Alpena St. Anne, and I still couldn't straighten my arm out and shoot. I only scored 2 points, and that was part of the reason we lost.
Yeah.
I thought we were good enough to win the state championship that year. I played basketball down in Lansing when I was in the 7th grade and 8th grade for Plymouth Congregational Church in the YMCA Church League. But I was just a little fellow. When I was in the 9th grade, I was only 5'2" and weighed about 90 pounds. And I stayed small, and when I played basketball up for the high school up here, in my junior year, I was about 5'6". And that next summer, I grew 5 inches, and I got up to 6 feet for my senior year. But I was always a shrimp, and I couldn't get into a lot of the sports that I wanted to do. We moved here and graduated from Roscommon High School.
What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1939, and one of the things that came up was when my father went out as fire marshal, the Michigan State Police, which was headed by Colonel Vandercook, and Major Marsh was second in command. In the meantime, Major Marsh took charge of Boys Vocational School in Lansing, which is the reform school, at 400 North Pennsylvania. And when I graduated from high school, one day I got a telephone call from Major Marsh, who was a good friend of my father and mother. And he said, "I got a job for you. Come on down. You can work at my school down here for your room and board." So for 3 years, I lived at Boys Vocational School. and worked for my room and board, which was a big help. And the only tough thing about it was that if you had to work on Saturdays and Sundays, and also you didn't have a way to get out to college in East Lansing, so you went down and hitchhiked off the corner of Michigan and Pennsylvania for 3 years, going back out in the morning, back at noon, because the big meal was served at noon. You went back in the afternoon and you hitchhiked back during that time. Probably I was the only probate judge in Michigan that ever spent 3 years at boys' vocational school. At least as far as I know I was. We used to have a lot of fun kidding about that.
Sure. What was your job there?
I was a guard.
Oh, guard.
They had carts and they carried the food back from the main kitchen to each of the cottages at mealtime. The kids played outdoors in fenced-in fields during their free time and everything like that. And we were guards, and our main job was when we ran away, we'd go catch them. That's what we were supposed to do.
Did you carry a gun?
No,
No.
nothing. You just walk. And in the third year, I was in charge of the field house there, where they played basketball and everything else. And incidentally, that is now Lansing Eastern's field house, where they play their basketball. And we used to have quarterfinal basketball games in the state tournaments there and everything like that. And I still play basketball for Plymouth Congregational Church in the league downtown when I could get free. And I can remember the man under Major Marsh would say, "You can go when it's time." And I'd go up to him and say, "It's so-and-so time. I've got 15 minutes to get downtown." He said, "Well, I guess you can go." So I usually jogged all the way downtown to get to play basketball in the Y. But anyway, then in senior year, Jean graduated from school, and her name is really Patricia Jean. And so she was coming down to go to Michigan State because our mother said we're going to college. So my mother decided to come down, and we rented the apartment on Pennsylvania Avenue, and my mother went to work in a propeller plant as an inspector because some of our friends from years before got her in there to work. And the senior year,
What kind of plant?
propeller,
Oh, propeller.
mm-hmm.
Oh,
For airplane. And so I didn't have to work at Boys Vocational School that year. That was the first year I did. Incidentally, when you worked there, you lived there too. And you lived in a locked room. You better have the door locked. You had a room and a bathroom. But beyond that, you were locked in, you studied and did the rest. That's where you lived.
sure.
Once in a while, I have half a day off somewhere to do it. But one of the interesting things about that I should tell about myself is in my junior year, on one Saturday, I was due to take the reception college from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. And there was about 30 boys that, as they were brought in from places. And when I went there that one particular day, the man in charge of it said, "Jim, you'll be very careful. We got 2 boys from the Myrtle Street gang in Detroit, which is the worst gang in Michigan for kids. And we got them in here, and they've only been here 4 days, and you watch your back because these kids are tough." And I know I spent all day as I went through there for 12 hours. I had my back against, pretty well facing the wall, because I was scared what was going to happen, because they were bigger than I was, and tougher by far. But anyway, it was an experience worthwhile,
Sure.
and something that not many people ever had. But anyway, I got there to that cottage this day, and he showed me the Detroit Free Press. And there was a reporter in Detroit that was out to make a name for himself. So he had been at the vocational school, and he was telling the headlines about the cruelties at the boys' vocational school, and a bunch of pictures in there, all of which was not true. but this was the whole back page of the Free Press. And so I took a look at those, and once again, the man said, "You better be careful today, and this is a rough day." But anyway, we got through it. My senior year at Michigan State, and I was in advanced military in the field artillery part, and I had been chosen to be in advanced military at the end of my sophomore year. Something that's a little something to think about. At the end of my sophomore year, the Navy was at Michigan State with their recruiters, and they were looking for men to go to Navy flight school. And they looked over my records and they said, "If you will sign up, we will skip all pre-flight schools and all that type of stuff, and you go directly to flight school." And I thought about, well, then I made advanced military, which normally would have kept me in Michigan State for 2 years. And I finally said no. As it so happened, if I had taken that chance in the Navy and gone to flight school, I would have graduated 1 month after Pearl Harbor. I've always thought about that, though.
Oh, sure.
What had ever become of me if I had done. Anyway, we were at senior at Michigan State, and the Army has an unusual way of playing fun with you. We were supposed to graduate in June, be commissioned as second lieutenant, and then sent to school. As it happened in March of that year, 43, they said, "We changed all the plans. Things are different. We will put you in the bus tomorrow and we'll take you to Detroit, and you go through the induction center. You are now privates." So that's what happened. We went down and we all became privates before we graduated. And they said, the next thing is you'll have to go to OCS, Officers Training School, to become a second lieutenant. You don't automatically become one. So everybody that was in advanced military from March on in 1943 at Michigan State became privates and were sent to camps for 2 or 3 months and then sent to officers training school. The weird thing about that is the class behind us was taken to camps the previous summer, and they were sergeants. So it was a little unusual. I played basketball in the Lansing City League that final year. We had a pretty good team, and we were in Class B, and we played the Class A champions, and I was pretty lucky, made quite a few points, and we were lucky. Anyway, one thing that I do remember that I am proud to acknowledge is that we played the best team in Lansing, who all were out of school and all were played all over the other cities. And after we played them twice, they came to me and said they wanted me to join their team, which was really a honorable thing. So I said, "Fellas, you're too late. In about 2 months, I'll be gone in the Army and I won't be back here." So I never got a chance to play with them. And I regretted that I couldn't do it, but apparently I played well enough against them that they wanted me to play with them. But anyway, my sister continued on to Michigan State, and she graduated in 1946 in social work, and she was stationed at Harrison for a year or two. And in 1948, I was going out to go to camp in California for the summer, and we decided to all drive up there. And she resigned her job, and my mother and sister and I went out there to California, to Hollywood, and all over. And incidentally, she went to training school to be a hostess, and she became a hostess for one of the airlines in 1948, and she was with them for quite a while. In fact, just a few years ago, when she was at least 60 years of age, the hostesses went on strike, and when they did, she went back and flew with the airline to to England all the time, from California to England
Good for her.
for about 3 or 4 months, and had just a marvelous time. I straightened some of those kids out too. But anyway, it was fun. She married a pilot, and about 1952, they went to California because he was going to find jet planes and everything else. And she is still out there in Scottsdale, California. Her husband went to one day went to go to the airport, and on the way there he got sick, and they called an ambulance and took him to the hospital. And the federal government says, "You've had a heart attack, you can no longer be a pilot." And they took his license all the way from him, and that was the end. So they bought the California Mining Journal, and they published that for a few years out there, which is all about mining, gold mines and silver mines and everything else. And she's still out there in Scottsdale, California, in that part. In good health, doing fine.
Great.
She has 2 daughters who are maybe
So her time in Roscommon was very short.
her has these 2 daughters who were close to 50 years of age, and each of them, the one has one boy, and he's only 6'4", and he's now in the Army, and the other one has 2 children. The one girl's at San Diego State, and the boy is now 6'5", and he's just a junior in high school. She married big men.
Yeah.
Getting back to myself, I went to a camp up in Wisconsin in summer '43, and from there I had graduated from Michigan State as a private, and from there I went to OCS at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and graduated from there in December of '43. Went to Camp Bragg in North Carolina, and had a good position there, but I didn't know how safe it was. So anyway, I ended up in the 42nd Division out in Oklahoma. And then 44, December 44, they sent I was a field artillery, and they sent all of our infantry regiments over because of the Battle of the Bulge. And so they were down in Alsace-Lorraine, and so they sent us over there in first week in January to get over there, and we reunited with our infantry regiment. And we went from Marseille, France, up to somewhere in Alsace-Lorraine, and we took over from another division. And in February, I was sent up to the infantry, and I stayed with them from February 16th to the end of the war. And I ended up in Austria. We had gone all the way from Alsace-Lorraine to Austria, and not dangerous, not too dangerous anyway. But anyway, this one of those things. I had about almost 3 months of steady day by day with the infantry, and nothing, just did a job, what it would be. But I tell you what, one incident that made me mad, and I never got over it. We had gone through and got to the city of Dahan, D-A-H-N, and they said, well, this was in March, you've gone as far as you can go because you're being pinched out by the units on both sides of it. So you're going to have a few days off. But anyway, the first day off, I was still with the infantry, and I had a Jeep assigned to me, which I made sure I kept with me for always. And they said to me, we got to take some prisoners back. There's about 500 of them over here. And they were. And they were standing there, and they had been disarmed, and they had their overcoats on. This was March. It was cold. We were up in the mountains, and so on. And you're taken back, and you'll find from PW, you'll find some a place back there where we constructed a place to put all these PWs, and you took them over to the military police, and then you come back. And there was just myself and four other men, because we only had one Jeep to get back. We weren't going to walk. So we said, all right, we will do it, because we basically had the day off. And we got back there about 4 or 5 miles walking, and up on the hill here, some brass up in the hill, down comes the Jeep, and who's in charge? And they took me up there, and there was the general up there. I think it was a 1-star. And he proceeded to give me fists, all fits he could do, because I didn't have their hands above their heads, and they weren't marching in step.
Wow.
Now, this was just about 3 days before we were in the shooting. We were 2 days. So anyway, I said, okay, so down and went. What else can you say? And had them put their hands above their heads. They were carrying loads of bread. They were carrying overcoats and everything else, and stepping. We were that way for about 200 yards or so. The men couldn't march.
Oh, yeah.
So we got 3 or 4 miles down the road. There's another bunch up on the hill. Down, they come and get me and haul me up again. This time it was a 2-star general. And Lieutenant, who's in charge of you? Why aren't they marching with their hands above their heads and so on and all this stuff? And I got chewed out again real vigorously at that particular time. And so down we went again, hard off, and we got another 2 or 3 miles, and here's another Jeep coming down the hill from another, and up there was another general, and he chewed me out. I think I'm the only man in the Army that got chewed out by 3 generals in about 4 hours for something I had no control of. Anyway, I came down, and we finally found the MPs and got a receipt for all the prisoners and rode the Jeep back. And I said, never again will I get back far enough so anyone can chew me out again. I'll never have that happen. And it so happened for the remaining time in the war, the remainder of March and all of April and some of May, I never went back far enough that I saw anybody above the rank of captain. I stayed right up with the infantry all the time. And most of the time we walked. But we weren't being shot at much. I had an opportunity to do some good work and did it and so on. But I was lucky. I wasn't in really real danger. But then they said, now, you've only been over here 6 months, and you've only been in the Army a couple of years. You don't have enough points. So I was kept on occupation duty for a year. And most of the time I was in Salzburg, Austria.
Wow, that's a nice place to be.
Well, it was for most of the year, except I was too busy. I started out as a battalion athletic officer, and then they made me in charge of all the rations and all the stuff and everything else they got. And then they made me assistant S2, which meant the S2 came back home on leave. And I took his job, and I had the border between Germany and Austria, all the way from almost to the Danube River across past Hitler's great place of retreat. And so I had the special railroad that ran in Germany up and down there. The trains they run down to Bulgaria and all up and down. I forget the name of it now, but anyway, and. I would get chewed out for that too. I have to reply by endorsement because you were between Germany and Austria. And as crossing the country, you had to check all the passports, you had to check everything else there was. And if we held the train up longer than an hour, somebody reported the train was being held up by border officers, and then I had to reply to it. And then I had the Autobahn between Germany and Austria, and also Hitler's lair down there. And I remember one time I came in the morning and said, we had a little problem out here. And they called in. I said, what happened? He said, well, there was a colonel out here with his girlfriend in a car, and he wouldn't stop. He ran the border, so we shot his tires out. That, down come reply by endorsement, which we did, and we heard no more about that. colonel wasn't right, and so on. But anyway, we had some of that stuff, and oh, first time I went across the Daniel River, I went across it about 3 in the morning, and I couldn't tell if it was black or blue or pink. And we went across in rubber boats, and that was a little dangerous. And that's the first time I saw it. But then later on, after I left Salisbury because they deactivated our division, we were up in um, Linz, Austria. And Linz is on the Danube River. And I was in charge of the border from Linz all the way back to Germany. And the Russians were on the other side. They were all Mongolians over there. And I went across once or twice on orders, but I didn't go across because I wanted to. But we used to be at a bridge right there. It was at this hotel where we were staying. And every once in a while you'd hear the machine guns. Somebody was running from one side of the bridge to the other and spattered bullets off the hotel. But anyway, it was all right. But I was over there a year. And then I came back, and I got back home about in July of 46. And I was a captain by that time. So I came home, and the first week I was home, I was down at Michigan Law School. I said, I want to apply. I want to go to law school. It's way back. And he said, oh, but you should have applied. We're full. You should have applied long ago. We don't have anything. There's no chance of you getting in. Why didn't you apply sooner? I said, I was sitting in Linz, Austria 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago. I was sitting over there. I didn't know when I was going to get home. And they finally said, you can go on the next train and I'll get it. So anyway, they said, well, we'll take your application and get your credits from Michigan State, but there's no chance. So I came home, and I thought this was a nice way to treat a captain, just come home from the Army. But anyway, the day before school started, I got a telegram, you're accepted. So I raced down there, and I got there.
Where was your mother living at that time?
In Roscommon, here.
In Roscommon.
And
So
anyway.
she had stayed here the whole time you were in the service?
Oh, yeah. Well, no, she was working this propeller plant during part of the time I was in service. But they ceased operations about 6 months before the war was over, so she moved back home. And incidentally, I went down there and I showed up that day and show you what I thought. Anyway, I said, here I am. I got your telegram yesterday. I'm here. Where do I sign? They said, where do you live? I said, where do I live? I live in Roscommon yesterday. I just got your telegram yesterday. They said, you can't register in law school till we know where you're living. Like kids. I went out to Wooler got the place out there and came back in the next day and got into law school. But that's the way they treated you, just like little kids. And it didn't touch them quite the right way. Anyway, but we had, I went through law school, and junior year in law school, I wanted to play basketball, and the American Legion had a place there that we used to go and watch the fights and stuff. And anyway, I was on the team, and there was only about 10 of us, and we won the state championship in American Legion. So we went to Crawfordsville, Indiana, by Louisville for the national tournament. And we beat the state of Pennsylvania the first game, and we lost the state of Illinois the second game and get back. But the stupidity of things they did, when your first year in law school, if you didn't attend class, you were marked down. If you weren't prepared to respond to what they asked you were marked down. And if you went home on a Saturday, because you had to have a Saturday class, that was the rule. If you went home on a Saturday, you got 2 demerits for going home on a Saturday. This is the way they ran the law school at that time. Anyway, I would say 70% of the men in the school were veterans. One of my closest friends was in the Navy, and he was on the Indianapolis when it was sunk by a Japanese submarine, and he was in law school. There was another man that was a lieutenant colonel, and all kinds of people in there. They treated us like kids down there. Anyway, I never got over it. But anyway, after I graduated from law school,
So that was 4 years.
3 years,
Three.
3 years, 46 to 49. I took the bar exam in September, and it was 2 full days of taking bar exam. And then they said, we'll let you know, which they did by Christmas, just barely by Christmas. So then I said, well, this is time to go to work. So I had to go get some furniture and some other stuff. And I rented a place in Woody Lockray and opened my law office. And I was I wanted to be the first attorney who was a resident here to be admitted to the bar here in Roscommon. So I waited from last part of December till the 2nd of January in 50. And then I was admitted by Judge Schaefer at that time. And that's been 54 years ago.
Wow.
And so I practiced law here. And then 3 years after I started practicing law, I ran for probate judge, and I won the job. And I was probate judge 10 years. And
Did you have to give up your practice in that 10 years?
no,
No.
you could not practice in your own court, but you could practice in other courts, in other counties. So, because it's only a half-time job. And it being a half-time job, that's the way they paid. The first 3 years, you got $3,000 a year. The second 4 years, you got $4,000 a year, and I was earning the magnificent sum of $5,000 a year when I resigned. But anyway, I was well thought of, and
Did you specialize in any particular type of law?
you couldn't specialize. Then you had to do everything,
there was no
except
law.
I wouldn't take criminal stuff.
Oh, okay.
Once I became probate judge, I wouldn't take criminal stuff. I said, that's not up to a judge to be defending criminals. I didn't want any part of it. And they didn't call me to do it. So anyway, I was lucky enough in 61, when the probate judges had their convention, I went out to play golf one afternoon. They came back and they said, hey, you're the presiding judge. And what do you mean? Well, we elected a presiding judge in the state of Michigan for all the probate judges for a year.
Wow.
I said, okay. And it had some duties and various things that were involved. Mainly filling an office on a temporary basis, like somebody was going to be gone for 2 weeks and they had their calendar full, and you had to find another judge to come into that place and do their work and all that kind of stuff, which was time consuming, but I did it. But in 63, I decided I was probate judge, and I'd been president of Rotary, and I was working 10th District admitting new lawyers, going over their credentials, and a whole lot of things. I said, there's too many things. I got to earn a living. So I resigned from Rotary, and I resigned as probate judge, and I resigned from most of my stuff to get in the office and earn a living. And I guess that, but the only other thing that would add to that is I practiced law till about 20 years ago. And I played basketball till I was 69 in 9 months. Down here at Craft Center, I was still playing at that age. I was playing in the league. You had to be 30 to be in the But some of those things. Now, in my family, I married Helen Richardson, December 27, 1950. And we have 4 children, Ann, Jane, Carol, and Sue. We have 7 grandchildren. And Ann is working in Munson Hospital in charge of an apartment up there. Jane is a vice president of a great big huge mortgage company. And banks and so on down at Jacksonville, Florida. And I said, Jane, what do you do? And she said, well, I'm the director of all the, oh, I don't want to say, machines and all that type of work for the whole outfit. And I said, well, it's pretty taxing job. She said, yeah. Did. I said, how many mortgages do you take care of through this place? She said, oh, about 500,000. And she does real well. My third daughter is a nurse in Louisville, Kentucky, and she has two girls and a boy. The two girls, the oldest girl is a senior at University of Kentucky, and the second one's a sophomore there, and the boy is a junior in high school. And Jane doesn't have any children. Ann has one son, Penn. And then the youngest daughter finished up at Northwestern University, and she's a physical therapist and has been for a great number of years. And she's got three children, two boys, 10 and 8, and a girl, 5. And she thinks she's 15. So anyway, we are very lucky. The name is not going to carry on because I got 4 daughters, but we're very lucky. We have no diseases. We have no real troubles in the family, and I'm just a very lucky man. I was doing fine, playing golf and not basketball, but playing golf and doing all kinds of things until a year ago in August, I suffered a heart attack and a severe stroke at the same time. So I'm kind of halfway going now. But I intend to stick around for a long time.
Sure, that's great. That's wonderful.
I can't think of anything right else I should tell you.
Well, you know a lot of local history.
Oh, yeah. From way back.
That's very good. Like you say, your family's been here a long time. So let me see if I have that straight about the origin of the Roscommon hardware. Started with your grandmother.
It originally belonged to Orchids. My father married their daughter in his first marriage.